It started on a Tuesday, not the dramatic kind, the orthopedic kind. I had just come back from a 9 a.m. yoga class designed specifically for people whose knees sound like bubble wrap. The instructor said, "Honor your body." My body replied by limping home. I made coffee, oat milk, no sugar, because at 58, rebellion looks like lactose avoidance. I was looking for ibuprofen. That was the entire mission. No intuition, no female sixth sense. Just joint pain and gravity. I opened his nightstand drawer because mine was already full of things men never need. Hand cream, lip balm, a paperback about grief I hadn't finished, and a quiet resentment I kept folded like old receipts. His drawer was usually boring. Socks, chargers, that one watch he never wore but insisted was an investment. Instead, there was a small box. New, clean, purposeful. Condoms. Not one. Not a tragic leftover from the Clinton administration. A full, confident box, the kind that believes in a future. I stared at it long enough for my coffee to get cold, which felt symbolic, but I wasn't ready to unpack that yet. Here's the thing no one tells you about discovering betrayal after 55. Your first thought isn't rage, it's logistics. I thought, we haven't needed these in years. Then, am I supposed to pretend I don't see this? Then, very practically, do these expire? I sat on the edge of the bed. The same bed where we had slept for 32 years, raised 2 kids, negotiated snoring treaties, and once cried together over a dead dog we loved more than most relatives. The mattress dipped in the exact shape of my disappointment. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't even say his name out loud, which I've learned is how panic sneaks in, through vowels. Instead, I laughed. A short, dry sound, like my soul had just tripped over something and refused to apologize. Of course, I thought. Of course, this is how it shows up. Not lipstick, not texts, not a trembling confession. A box, neatly placed. In my house, in my drawer-adjacent marriage. I closed the drawer gently, almost tenderly, like it was a sleeping animal that might wake up and lie to me. For a moment, I wondered if I was wrong. I had been wrong before. I'd been sensitive, imaginative, reading into things. That's what he always said, smiling in that way men do when they think calmness equals truth. But the box stayed where it was, silent, confident, smug. I made another coffee. I stood at the window. I watched a woman across the street walk her dog like she trusted the leash. 32 years gives you muscle memory. You know the weight of your life, even when it shifts. And something had shifted, not loudly, not violently. Just enough to tell me the story I thought I was in was no longer mine. When he came home that night and kissed my cheek, I noticed his cologne sat differently on him, like it had learned a new language. I smiled back. I asked how his day was. I listened. I nodded. And while he talked, all I could think was this. I am not crazy. I am not imagining things. And I am done being a background extra in my own bed. The drawer upstairs waited. So did I. If you've never been gaslit, let me describe it accurately. It's not fire. It's fog. It doesn't burn, it blurs. By Wednesday morning, the box upstairs had already begun to feel hypothetical. Not because it wasn't real, but because 32 years with the same man trains you to distrust your own eyesight before you distrust his character. That was one of his quieter talents. He came into the kitchen while I was slicing an avocado with the concentration of someone defusing a bomb. He kissed my temple, reached for a mug and said, "You okay? You seem distracted." There it was, the opening line. "I'm fine," I said, because women my age have been saying that since Reagan. He studied me the way men do when they think they're being caring but are actually checking for cracks. "You sure? You've just been a little off lately." Off. Not suspicious, not hurt. Off, like a thermostat. I watched him from across the island. This man had once forgotten our anniversary and convinced me it was next weekend. He had once misplaced an entire weekend in Napa, and somehow, I apologized for being too rigid about dates. I said nothing about the drawer. I wanted to hear how he'd explain a crime he didn't yet know was discovered. Instead, I nodded. I smiled. I asked if he wanted eggs. Later, alone, I thought about all the other Tuesdays that had stacked up behind this one. The corporate dinners where I was introduced as my wife, instead of by name. The way his mother used to pat my arm and say, "You're so low maintenance, dear," like that was a compliment and not a warning label. I remembered a holiday party years ago, him laughing too hard at a younger colleague's joke, his hand lingering on her back just long enough for me to notice and then doubt myself. When I mentioned it in the car, he laughed. Gently. Like you laugh at a child who's misunderstood the rules. You're reading into things, he'd said. You always do that. Always. Such a useful word. It turns one moment into a personality flaw. By Thursday, I realized something uncomfortable. I had become very good at disappearing inside my own life. I knew how to make space for his moods, his ambitions, his silences. I knew how to translate neglect into busy, dismissal into tired, and betrayal, apparently, into maybe I'm being dramatic. The real insult wasn't the affair. It was the assumption that I would doubt myself before I doubted him. That night, he sat on the couch scrolling through his phone while I folded laundry. 32 years distilled into socks and shirts. I held up one of his dress shirts, the good one, the one he wore on trips, and said casually, "You traveling again next week?" He didn't look up. Yeah, just one night. Just one night. I waited for something inside me to collapse. It didn't. What happened instead was quieter and far more dangerous. Clarity. I suddenly saw how small I had made myself to keep the peace. How often I'd accepted confusion as a marital duty. How many times I'd been told I was too much for asking for what was actually very little. He glanced up then, finally sensing the shift. "Why do you ask?" I folded the shirt carefully. Too carefully. "No reason," I said. "I was just organizing." That wasn't a lie. I was organizing facts, memories, evidence, and myself. Upstairs, the drawer waited. And for the first time since Tuesday, I didn't feel afraid of opening it. I felt insulted that he thought I wouldn't. By Friday, I stopped asking myself why and started asking how much. This is what happens when a woman who has spent 3 decades running a household realizes her marriage needs auditing. You don't cry, you inventory. I opened my laptop at the dining table, the one we bought after the kids left, convinced we'd finally use the space. I didn't snoop like a teenager. I reviewed like an adult. Calendar, email, credit card statements. The digital paper trail of a man who believed discretion meant deleting texts but forgetting hotels still send confirmations. Turns out betrayal has receipts. There was a pattern once I stopped pretending not to see it. Midweek, one-night trips that somehow always landed in the same city. Expenses labeled client dinner that occurred suspiciously late and lasted suspiciously long. A boutique hotel I didn't recognize but his loyalty points apparently adored. I made a spreadsheet, of course I did. Column A, date. Column B, excuse. Column C, cost. Column D, what he said when I asked questions. Column D filled up fastest. Work stuff. You wouldn't be interested. You're overthinking again. Again. Such a forgiving word for him. As I typed, memories bubbled up like errors I'd ignored for years. The night he came home unusually cheerful and claimed it was just a good meeting. The sudden interest in fitness at 57 that did not include me. The way he started locking his phone, not dramatically, just enough to call it coincidence. I paused, hands hovering over the keyboard, and laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was obvious, and I had mistaken obvious for impossible. We'd built a whole life on the assumption that longevity equaled loyalty. 32 years felt like a warranty. I hadn't read the fine print. I remembered a dinner party last year, someone joking about midlife crises. He squeezed my hand and said, "That won't be me." Everyone laughed, including me, especially me. By noon, the spreadsheet was undeniable. The affair wasn't a phase, it was a routine, well-funded, organized, almost respectful in its consistency. That hurt more than chaos would have. I closed the laptop and walked upstairs. The bedroom felt different now, less like a sanctuary, more like a storage unit for shared history. I opened the nightstand drawer again. The box was still there. I picked it up this time. It was lighter than I expected. Not just physically, emotionally, like the weight had already transferred somewhere else. I sat on the bed and thought about all the roles I'd played: wife, mother, support staff, emotional IT department. I had optimized my life for everyone else's comfort. I had mistaken endurance for virtue. And suddenly, I understood the most dangerous part of being betrayed at my age. People expect you to shrink. To endure quietly. To be grateful for what you had and not ask for dignity now. That assumption settled something in me. I wasn't angry yet. Anger would come later, like weather. What I felt now was resolve, the kind that arrives when you stop negotiating with reality. Downstairs he was on a call, laughing in that professional voice he used to charm rooms. I listened from the stairs, thinking how well he performed sincerity. I went back into the bedroom, opened my sewing kit, the old one, inherited from my mother, and held a pin between my fingers. Sharp, small, unassuming. I smiled. If my marriage had taught me anything, it was this. Small things placed carefully can change everything. I closed the drawer, and for the first time since Tuesday, I felt something like control. Revenge, contrary to popular belief, does not arrive with violins. It arrives with silence, with practicality, with a thought so calm it scares you. I didn't rush it. That's the thing about women my age, we've outlived urgency. I folded laundry. I answered emails. I watered a plant that had no idea what kind of household it was in. All the while, the idea sat beside me like a well-mannered guest, waiting to be acknowledged. I went back upstairs in the late afternoon, when the light hit the bedroom just right. Soft. Forgiving. The kind of light real estate agents love because it lies. I opened the drawer again. The box looked almost innocent now. A white rectangle full of confidence and bad decisions. I took it out, placed it on the bed, and stared at it like one stares at a problem that has stopped being emotional and started being mechanical. I opened my sewing kit. My mother's hands had been steadier than mine, but she would have approved. She believed in preparation, in quiet competence, in the power of not announcing your intentions. The pins were simple, shiny, unremarkable. The kind of thing you don't notice until you do. I worked slowly, carefully, not out of cruelty, but respect for detail. I wasn't trying to injure anyone. I was trying to disrupt a narrative. That's the thing men like him never expect. Women who rewrite the script instead of flipping the table. When I finished, I closed the box and returned it to the drawer exactly where it had been. Same angle. Same smug little promise. I even adjusted the socks next to it. I am not a monster. Then I sat on the bed and waited for the wave of guilt people warn you about. It didn't come. What came instead was a strange sense of professionalism, like I'd just handled a necessary administrative task. No drama. No speeches. Just action. Of course there was risk. I could already hear the future accusations forming. You're crazy. You've lost it. Who does something like that? The answer, as it turns out, is someone who has been underestimated for 3 decades. He came home that evening with the casual confidence of a man whose secrets were, in his mind, perfectly stored. He kissed my cheek, asked what was for dinner, told me a story about traffic that felt rehearsed. I listened. I always listened. But something had changed in the soundscape of my marriage. Every word he said now echoed. That night he showered, humming. I watched steam curl under the bathroom door and thought about how many lies can fit inside a routine. I slid into bed beside him, turned off the light, and lay there perfectly still. My heart wasn't racing. It was counting. Minutes, days, distance. He fell asleep quickly. He always did. Clear conscience or excellent denial, hard to tell. In the dark, I stared at the ceiling and realized the most radical thing I had done wasn't the pins. It was deciding I no longer needed his version of reality. Upstairs, in the drawer, the box waited. Downstairs, in his calendar, a trip waited. And inside me, something new took shape. Patience. Not the patient patience I'd practiced as a wife, but the strategic kind. The kind that smiles. The kind that lets men believe they are safe. I didn't go looking for an ally. That would have implied hope, or trust, or the kind of optimism that gets women like me into trouble. I went for coffee. Upper West Side, late morning. A place where people my age pretend they're working while secretly judging the posture of strangers. I chose a corner table, ordered something expensive and unnecessary, and opened a book I had no intention of reading. That's when I saw him. Mark. I didn't know his name yet, of course. I just knew his face did something to my stomach. Tightened, then stilled, like recognizing a song you wish you'd never learned the lyrics to. He was sitting 2 tables away, staring at his phone with the expression of a man trying very hard not to be publicly devastated. His wedding ring was still on. That detail mattered. He looked up. We made eye contact. Held it a second too long. Then both of us looked away, polite and wounded. 5 minutes later, he stood up, walked over, and said, "This is gonna sound strange, but is your husband an architect?" There it was. The universe skipping foreplay. "Yes," I said. "That does sound strange." He exhaled, sat down without asking. Americans usually ask. Betrayed people don't. "My wife," he said, then stopped, restarted. "I think our spouses might be professionally connected." I smiled, not warmly, not cruelly, accurately. Ah, I said, you too. We didn't trade details right away. We traded confirmations, cities, dates, the boutique hotel. That one midweek night that apparently solved everyone's creative block except ours. He laughed once, sharply. She said it was a women's leadership conference. I nodded. Mine said just one night. We sat there, two people in our late 50s, sipping coffee that tasted like money and disappointment, realizing we'd been drafted into the same lie from opposite sides. There was no flirting, no chemistry, just recognition, the kind that doesn't need reassurance. I don't want to blow things up, he said quickly, as if worried I might throw a drink. I just needed to know I wasn't crazy. That word again. Crazy is a convenient diagnosis, I said, especially when it's free. He smiled at that, a small one, grateful, tired. We exchanged numbers, not like accomplices, like adults filing a joint complaint against reality. As we stood to leave, he hesitated. What are you gonna do? I thought about the drawer, the box, the pins, the waiting. I'm going to listen, I said, carefully. He nodded, like he understood more than I'd said. Outside, the city went on being loud and indifferent. I walked home feeling lighter, not because I'd found help, but because I'd found confirmation. I wasn't alone, and I wasn't wrong. That afternoon, my husband texted me a heart emoji. Just one, minimal effort, maximum camouflage. I stared at it, then typed back, have a good meeting. Upstairs, the drawer stayed closed. For now. Once you decide not to confront someone, you begin rehearsing your own normalcy. It's a performance. Subtle. Exhausting. Academy Award adjacent. I became excellent at it. I cooked dinner the way I always had, measured, competent, unthreatening. Chicken, roasted vegetables, a sauce I'd made so many times my hands could do it without consulting my heart. He ate, praised it, scrolled through his phone between bites. Marriage as usual. You're quiet, he said. I smiled. Just tired. That was true, in the way lies sometimes are. Over the next few days, I paid attention. Not like a detective, like a woman who has finally stopped editing reality. I noticed how often he checked his phone face down, how his voice shifted when he talked about work, slightly higher, slightly rehearsed, how he packed with care for someone who claimed not to care. On Thursday night, he mentioned the trip, casually, like he was talking about milk. Just one night, he said again, as if repetition turned it into fact. I nodded. I know. That surprised him. He looked up, searching my face for static. Finding none, he relaxed. Men mistake calm for compliance. It's one of their most charming flaws. After he went to bed, I sat at the dining table and opened my calendar. I scheduled brunch for Sunday. Not dramatic, not suspicious. A restaurant we'd been to before. Bright, crowded, expensive enough to discourage shouting. I invited 2 of his colleagues and their spouses, people who smiled at me and remembered my name when it was convenient. Then I texted Mark. Sunday, late morning. You don't have to say anything. Just be there. He replied almost immediately. Understood. That word again. Adults use it when emotions would only slow things down. The night before his trip, he laid his clothes out carefully. The good shirt, the one I'd folded 100 times. I watched from the doorway, thinking how strange it was that intimacy could coexist with complete exclusion. In bed, he reached for my hand. I let him take it, not out of longing, but curiosity. I wanted to see if my body would betray me before my mind did. It didn't. When he left the next morning, suitcase rolling behind him, he kissed my cheek and said, "Love you." I said it back. Reflex is a powerful thing. The door closed. The apartment settled. I stood very still in the quiet and waited for the grief. It didn't arrive on schedule. Instead, I felt something closer to anticipation. Not excitement, nothing so crude, just readiness. Like the moment before a play begins when the audience is seated and the lights are about to dim. Upstairs, the drawer remained untouched. Downstairs, my phone stayed silent. Normalcy, it turns out, is easiest to perform when you're no longer invested in being believed. I poured myself a glass of water. I straightened the cushions. I lived my life. And somewhere between folding a dish towel and checking the time, I realized this was no longer about catching him. It was about letting him walk, confidently, into the version of the story he thought he controlled. Sunday was coming, and I had booked a table. The call came at 2:14 a.m. I know the exact time because insomnia sharpens numbers. Also because when your husband calls you in the middle of the night from a hotel he swore he'd only be in for one night, time becomes evidence. The phone vibrated on the nightstand. Not rang, vibrated. He always did that on trips. Claimed he didn't want to wake me. How considerate. I let it buzz once, twice. I wanted to hear the sound long enough to remember it later. Then I answered. Hello? Silence. Breathing. Fast. Uneven. The sound of a man discovering that control is not guaranteed. Are you awake? He asked. No, I said calmly. I just answer my phone in my sleep now. It's a new skill. He swallowed. I could hear it. 32 years teaches you the acoustics of guilt. Something happened, he said. Of course it did. I sat up in bed, switched on the lamp, and leaned back against the headboard. I crossed my legs. I was wide awake, suddenly, in the way people are when a long story finally reaches its punctuation. What kind of something? I asked. Another pause. Then rushed. I think I need to see a doctor. I closed my eyes, not in pain, in appreciation. Oh, I said. Tonight? Yes. I mean, maybe. I don't know, it's just something's wrong. There it was. The panic, raw, untranslated. I pictured him in a hotel bathroom with lighting designed to flatter no one. I pictured his phone shaking in his hand. I pictured the drawer opening, the confidence cracking, the script going off book. I kept my voice neutral, concerned but not curious. That's the trick. Are you hurt? I asked. No, I mean, yes, maybe. It's not like that, it's just… He stopped, started again. I can't explain it. I nodded, though he couldn't see me. That sounds stressful. He exhaled hard. I don't know what to do. That was new. For 3 decades he had always known what to do. Or at least pretended convincingly enough that I followed along. Hearing uncertainty in his voice felt like watching a building forget how to stand. Well, I said slowly, you're a grown man in a city with excellent health care. I'm sure you'll figure it out. Another silence. Longer this time. The kind where ego is frantically searching for leverage. I might come home early, he said. I smiled into the quiet bedroom. If that's what you think is best. Are you mad? He asked. Ah, the emotional temperature check, the old reflex. No, I said honestly. Why would I be? He didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was smaller. You just sound different. Not hysterical, not forgiving, different. I'm tired, I said. You should get some rest. I waited for him to say I love you. He didn't. Men in panic conserve language. Okay, he said. I'll call you later. I'll be here, I replied, and I meant it. Not in the way he hoped, but in the way a witness means it. The call ended. The room went quiet again. I set the phone down carefully, like it had teeth. For a moment I felt something flicker. Pity, maybe. Or nostalgia for the man he used to pretend to be. It passed quickly. Some emotions are just habits in disguise. I lay back against the pillows and stared at the ceiling. No racing heart, no shaking hands, just confirmation. The drawer had spoken, and it had used his voice. Sunday was still on the calendar. Brunch was still booked, and for the first time since Tuesday, I slept. Sunday arrived dressed as civility. The restaurant was already loud when I got there. Sunlight bouncing off white plates, the clink of cutlery, conversations stacked on top of each other like polite lies. Brunch is perfect for this sort of thing. No one expects honesty before noon. I wore something neutral, soft lines, no statements. Power, I've learned, doesn't need accessories. He arrived late, of course he did. Slightly disheveled, a man who had slept poorly and rehearsed apologies that didn't quite fit his mouth. He kissed my cheek, checked my face for weather, then smiled at the table like a politician who'd survived a small scandal and hoped the rest would behave. Sorry, he said. Traffic. I nodded. It happens. The colleagues arrived, their spouses. Small talk bloomed, coffee poured. Menus opened and closed with the confidence of people who believed they were here for eggs. Then Mark walked in. Not dramatically. Not with purpose. He just appeared, paused at the entrance like he was deciding whether to leave, then caught my eye. I gave him the smallest nod. He approached the table as if invited by fate or coincidence. In America, the line between the two is very thin. Oh, Mark, one of the colleagues said, surprised. Didn't know you were in town. Last-minute change, Mark replied, pleasant. He looked at my husband and smiled the way men do when they finally recognize each other. Mind if I join? My husband froze for half a second too long. Not enough for anyone to call it out, enough for me to enjoy it. Of course, he said. Please. We made room. Chairs scraped, plates shifted, the table adjusted itself around the truth. Conversation resumed, limping at first. Weather. Work. Someone's renovation. My husband laughed too loudly at nothing. Mark listened. I watched both of them with the detached interest of someone who had already read the ending. At some point, dessert menus hovering but not yet ordered, I reached into my bag. I meant to ask, I said lightly, eyes on my husband. Did you ever get that hotel email sorted out? The one that kept coming to our shared inbox? His smile stiffened. What email? Oh, I said. The confirmation. It kept resending. I opened it by mistake. Silence doesn't fall at brunch. It pauses. Mark leaned back slightly. Funny, he said. My wife mentioned something similar. My husband looked between us, then at the table, at the faces, at the audience he hadn't realized he had. I don't know what you're talking about, he said, voice measured, careful. I unlocked my phone. Not angrily, casually, like someone checking a recipe. I brought it, I said, in case I misunderstood. I didn't read it out loud. That would have been vulgar. I simply placed the phone on the table, screen up, and slid it gently toward the center. Dates. Location. 2 names that didn't belong together, finally spelled correctly. No shouting, no tears, just the sound of forks being set down. Someone cleared their throat, someone else reached for water. My husband didn't look at me. He looked at Mark. This is, he began. Mark raised a hand. Calm. Adult. You don't need to explain anything to me. That hurt him more than anger would have. I stood then, not abruptly, just enough to reclaim my height. I'm going to step outside, I said. I need some air. As I walked away, I heard my chair pushed back. Not mine. Outside, the city kept moving. Cars passed. A couple laughed too loudly on the corner. Life, rude and persistent. I breathed in, slowly. The way I'd been taught in yoga. Honor your body. Behind me, through the glass, I saw the aftermath. Not chaos. Consequence. I didn't go back in. Some scenes don't need encores. There is a strange quiet that follows public humiliation. Not the explosive kind. The administrative kind. My husband didn't come home that night. He texted once, something vague about needing space. I replied with a thumbs-up emoji, which felt both modern and deeply disrespectful. By Monday morning, the emails began. Not from him, from lawyers. Apparently brunch had legs. One of his colleagues checked in. Another asked if everything was okay in a way that made it very clear everything was not. Reputation, I learned, is a group project. Once you stop protecting it for someone else, it collapses surprisingly fast. He came back Tuesday evening. No suitcase, no confidence. Just a man who had been introduced to consequences and found them unflattering. We need to talk, he said, standing in the doorway like a guest. We do, I agreed. But not like you're used to. We sat at the dining table. No candles, no wine. This wasn't a reconciliation scene. This was accounting. He tried apologies first, general ones, abstract ones, the kind that don't require specifics and therefore don't require ownership. I never meant to hurt you. It just happened. You know how these things go. I stopped him with a raised hand, polite, final. I'm not here to help you feel better, I said. I'm here to finish this. That word, finish, landed harder than I expected. It was amazing how threatening clarity could be. The divorce was efficient. Not friendly, not dramatic. Efficient. The prenup he'd insisted on years ago, just in case, turned out to be a document of poetic justice. I kept the apartment. He kept his pension, minus what he'd spent funding his extracurriculars. His firm suggested a sabbatical. His clients suggested distance. His mother suggested prayer. I suggested nothing. When the papers were signed, the lawyer slid them across the table like menus. Any questions? I had one, but not the legal kind. Do people usually feel lighter after this? I asked. The lawyer smiled professionally. They feel clearer. That night, alone in the apartment, I opened the nightstand drawer one last time. The box was gone. I wasn't surprised. Men like him don't like reminders. They prefer amnesia. I closed the drawer and lay down on the bed. The mattress felt different, or maybe I did. Outside, the city hummed. Inside, my phone stayed blessedly silent. For the first time in years, there was no one left to explain myself to. And that, I realized, was the real settlement. People expect a glow-up at the end of stories like this. A new haircut, a younger lover, a dramatic relocation to somewhere with better lighting. What they don't expect is quiet. The first morning after everything was finalized, I woke up early. Not from anxiety, but habit. I made coffee the way I always had, then realized I could drink it wherever I wanted. I took the mug to the window and stood there, barefoot, watching the city rehearse its urgency. No one needed me to explain anything anymore. I signed up for a writing class that afternoon. Not because I wanted to be a writer. God, no. But because I wanted to put sentences somewhere that wouldn't argue back. On the first day, the instructor asked us to write about a moment that changed us. I chose a Tuesday. I didn't mention the drawer. Weeks passed, then months. The apartment became less of a museum and more of a home. I moved the bed, gave away his chair, bought plants I didn't know how to keep alive and learned anyway. Mark and I exchanged a few emails. Nothing heavy, nothing flirtatious. Two people who had survived the same storm waving from separate shores. That felt sufficient. Sometimes people ask if I regret how I handled things. I tell them the truth. I regret how long I waited to trust myself. At 60, I learned something that should be printed on wedding invitations in small, honest font. Loyalty that depends on your silence is not loyalty, it's control. The funny thing is, my knees stopped hurting as much. Or maybe they didn't. Maybe I just stopped carrying what wasn't mine. On Tuesdays now, I still go to yoga. The instructor still says, honor your body. This time, I do. I come home. I open drawers without fear. I live alone without loneliness. I laugh at the right things. I sleep deeply. And when I think back to that first moment, the box, the shock, the pause, I don't feel anger. I feel gratitude. Because that drawer didn't end my marriage. It gave me my life back. A year later, I found the sewing kit again. It was in the back of the hall closet, behind a stack of coats that remembered winters better than I did. The metal box was slightly dented, smelling faintly of time and patience. I sat on the floor and opened it, half expecting something sharp to accuse me. Nothing did. I held a pin between my fingers and smiled, not because of what it once did, but because of what it no longer had to. Life has a way of smoothing itself out when you stop gripping it so tightly. My days became unremarkable in the best possible way. Morning walks, groceries bought for one, dinners eaten without compromise. I learned which silence fed me and which ones I'd been using to starve myself. Sometimes, people still ask how I'm doing, their eyes scanning for damage, for bitterness, for a cautionary tale they can consume and return. I tell them I'm well, not healed. Healing isn't a finish line, but well enough to laugh without checking who's listening. I never replaced the nightstand drawer. I kept it. The wood has a small scratch now, barely visible, proof that something happened, proof that it passed. On Tuesdays I write. Not about betrayal, not about him. About light through windows, about aging hands, about the freedom of not having to be chosen to feel whole. I don't miss the marriage. I miss the woman who thought endurance was love. And even that grief has softened into gratitude. Some endings arrive quietly. No applause, no soundtrack, just a sense that your life finally fits. And when I close my eyes at night, the calm that meets me feels earned. That, I've learned, is what healing sounds like.